I was just looking at this article on USA Today, which is titled Trump is headed back to the White House. Can he pardon himself as president? And I think obviously that's exactly what Trump is going to do. I mean, I think in Trump's place, being like Trump, anybody who found themselves in this situation would pardon themselves if they are smart, right? It would be somewhat of a badass thing to do, which is right in line and in step with Trump's brand, with his political brand. Certainly, this badass, well, really just his brand, period, whether it's in politics or business. I mean, he does have a badass persona. And I think it's pretty obvious that he's going to pardon himself. And look, I mean, I don't have a huge problem with it, actually. I mean, it's this whole thing is a game. They're all gamers. All of these politicians, these oligarchs. I mean, it's just they're outplaying each other. They're just really, really good at the game of life. We're not in their league, the rest of us, and so we can't play with the big boys, and that's fine. But when you are in that league and you are Trump and you find yourself in this kind of mess that he has found himself in, and he pulls off a win. I mean, he wins the presidency a second time against the odds, and all of the charges immediately are put on hold because, listen, this is a game of chess. He checkmated everybody. And while I don't, support, a lot of his political positions by any means, I mean, my goodness, I'm terrified personally and also just as a citizen, I'm terrified. But in this particular instance, this particular context, I'm Trump, I'm pardoning myself. I'm pardoning myself, and the courts can do what the courts think is appropriate. Now, whether or not he can pardon himself is a legally murky issue, right? And in some contexts, it might even be considered explosive, depending on which side you're on. Now, I know that under the Constitution, obviously, a president has broad clemency powers, broad power to pardon for federal crimes. It has never been done before where a president has ever pardoned himself. No president has ever tested this power on themselves. And I guess they really didn't because it wasn't necessary. They didn't have to. Necessity is the mother of invention. And I think that Trump being the first president, twice impeached, 34 felony convictions, or how much ever it was, he's in a league of his own. And so it's extraordinary situation, extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures. And the presidential self-pardon, I think, is extraordinary. But absolutely, in his place, I would just pardon myself. And I wouldn't even stop at the federal stuff. I just pardon myself of everything and let the courts hash it out. The Supreme Court has never ruled on the issue, and you know that if he tries to do that, it's going to reach to the Supreme Court. They're going to be lawsuits and appeals all the way to the Supreme Court. But it seems like what the legal scholars agree on is that the Constitution is silent on the self-pardon. It does not expressly or explicitly prohibit self-pardon. It doesn't discuss self-pardons at all. But legal scholars are like, oh, if he does that, it's going to be this big constitutional crisis. I don't see how it can be a constitutional crisis when the Constitution is completely silent on the issue, right? And in terms of the wording that the Constitution uses to to give a president, the executive, the power to pardon, the scholars are saying that it's limited to federal crimes. I mean, I'm not even sure if that's even true, right? Um, some have argued that President Biden should just go ahead and preemptively pardon President Trump to preserve national unity and avoid setting a precedent for political retribution, which I think is what the the mood is in the country right now is like whichever party gets in, let's just kill everybody from the other party. Um, and so, that's an argument. I don't agree with it. I don't agree that President Biden should pardon Trump unless President Biden wants to. If President Biden, in his independent judgment, decides that as commander in chief, as president, he wants to pardon President Trump for XYZ reason or no reason at all, I support President Biden because I respect that this is his right to do. But I don't think it's proper for people to be um, telling Biden that he should pardon Trump or putting pressure on Biden to pardon Trump. Biden is not obliged to pardon Trump, just like Trump is not obliged to pardon anybody that he doesn't deem worthy of a pardon. At the same time, like I said, the Constitution does not prevent President Trump on day one from pardoning himself. I mean, and that's exactly how I would start out my presidency in his place. On day one, I pardon myself of everything, and they can spend the next 4 years hashing it out in the courts. I mean, really, you want some excitement, that's how you start with that. I just think, in terms, just to go back to the Biden point a little bit, I think this approach would risk normalizing impunity for certain types of people in the society who are powerful, they're rich, and they feel that they can circumvent the rule of law by just running for president and getting elected. I mean, not to say that's what Trump did, but in effect, that's what happened with Trump, right? And I was not for the lawfare against Trump, and I still am not for the lawfare, but it still doesn't change the fact that all of these charges were brought and he was able to circumvent them, some of them having nothing to do with when he was president, right? Some of these preceding his time in office, and he was able to just circumvent all the consequences by just winning the election. And I think if Biden issues a pardon, it will encourage a floodgate of people like that. And okay, we love Trump. He's very interesting. He's exciting. But what about the next guy who we may not all love as much, right? And he or she is just able to get away with literal murder because of some kind of precedent that said that, okay, you can do X, Y, and Z, just run for president and win. And, I just think it sends a really dangerous signal to the society, about power. And, I think the consequences for democracy would not be good in that case. I don't think that, I mean, look, you can argue that if Trump pardons himself and the courts allow it, that it's the same result, right? The self-pardon might even be more dangerous than if Biden pardons Trump. And I agree to some extent. But in this game of political chess, I'm just saying, in Trump's place, I mean, if, God forbid, I were in his place, I would pardon myself. I would just stay with my badass sort of image and brand and pardon myself. And, whatever happens after that happens after that. I mean, let everybody do what they need to do, but I would do what I need to do. I'm pardoning myself. Still, as I said, it would send a dangerous signal either way if the courts allow presidents to self-pardon in this kind of situation, or if President Biden is obliged to pardon Trump in this situation. I think it sets a precedent that maybe we don't want as a democracy, because today it's Trump, and Trump is Trump. Everybody loves a little bit of Trump. But what about the next guy who comes after, who is not so likable, who does all kinds of things, including murder people potentially? And he runs for president, he wins, and he basically uses this as some kind of precedent for him to get out of being held accountable, whether he's pardoned by the outgoing president or he is allowed to self-pardon, right? I just think that it would erode accountability, and it would embolden future leaders to engage in unlawful behavior, and it would alienate at least some Americans who see justice as, a non-negotiable, especially in a context like this. Um, that all said, I still have to say that I think the boldest move and most on brand move for Trump would be to pardon himself on day one. like literally, just to start out with a bang, pardon himself on day one. I think such an unprecedented act would cement his legacy as a political trailblazer willing to shatter norms, right? And I think that by issuing a self pardon, he would embrace the ultimate badass persona, like that his supporters like and admire, and I turning even his legal troubles into like a spectacle of audacity and defiance and just theater, and it just would be like insane. It would just, everybody would be talking about it all over the world. It would just be like TV, like good TV, right? Um, Obviously, as I said, a self pardon would likely face challenges, especially the state charges. In Trump's situation, it's exactly what I would do. Listen, if you haven't yet hit the subscribe button, definitely hit the subscribe button right now and support this channel, you guys.